So I hope everybody's getting a good dose of vegetable pest management here, is in addition to the soybean update.
Yeah, I mean, I have the worst bug problems in my tomatoes because I get home from work and I'm so exhausted of spraying and looking at bugs all the time. I'm like, just gonna let them eat it.
Yeah, and the hornworms could be a huge problem. I've seen some tomatoes this year that were just completely defoliated in some areas where hornworms whacked them.
You know, I'll get soybean loopers now in my tomatoes every year, but I haven't gotten a hornworm in Virginia yet.
I have people bring stuff in here and they want to know why the leaves are all messed up. And I said, well, you've had hornworms. And I didn't see a worm. I said, well, if you look at the ground or look at the leaves underneath these, you should see some frass, you know, where they've been. But and that's all tied to the moon phase, I think, with hornworms. Aren't they more? They're like a lot of caterpillars, aren't they? They kind of, the moon to some degree directs when they in their life cycle.
Well, yeah, and that's why the black light's an effective trap
Yeah.
for moth pests is because it puts off a similar light to the moon, so it pulls them in.
Yeah.
Hornworms are, to me, one of the more interesting pests to work with in tobacco, just because of the nature of their relationship with their host plant.
Yeah.
So the plant's like, come pollinate me, come pollinate me. And so it's pollinated, it's like, now I'm going to produce all these volatiles to bring in pests of the caterpillars of the moth that pollinated me.
Yeah.
It's just such an elegant system because it's been, you know, tobacco is a native plant. It's a native pollinator, and they've been having this battle for ages, right? So
that is pretty cool. I didn't think about them being native, and all the insect flora in that's also native is they're adapted to be able to attack them.
It's an arms race between them and the plants that they inhabit. It's really, really cool. Tobacco is a cool plant to work with. Yep. And I miss it.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start recording, everybody. We'll get started here. Let's see. All right, I think we're ready to go. So good morning, everybody. It's 1 minute after 9. Appreciate everybody being here. VCE AG Today, and today's topic of discussion for July 29th, 2021 is going to be soybean pest updates. Pleased to be joined this morning by Dr. Sally Taylor, our extension entomologist, and Dr. David Langston, our extension plant pathologist. Appreciate both of you being with us this morning, and hopefully you're not seeing too many issues in soybeans throughout the state so far, but I know we are approaching that time of the growing season where scouting and looking for a lot of these things is going to be timely. So appreciate you joining us today and offering those updates. Just a few housekeeping notes as always. Please, if you would, keep your mics muted throughout the presentation just to avoid any background noise. We'd really appreciate that. We will open it up at the end for questions and discussion. If you have a question, you can always put that in the chat window and we'll address those at the end of the presentations. Otherwise, it has been recorded, so the meeting this morning will be recorded. So if someone's not able to join us, we will post this to our playlist on YouTube. So you see the recording link there on the screen. Please share that with anyone you think that may find the information beneficial this morning. So without further ado, Dr. Taylor, I think you said you'd like to go first. So we appreciate you being here. And if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we can get started.
Thank you, Robbie. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yeah, I can see it, Sally. It's just in working mode. I think you need to put it in presentation.
Yep. Now we good?
Perfect.
All right. Y'all may have heard me say I miss tobacco. This is one of my favorite farms in Virginia because of these old tobacco barns. But I'm not here to talk about tobacco barns or tobacco farms, but about soybean pests. I think our #1 soybean pest in the Piedmont, certainly, and spreading into other parts of the state, is three-cornered alfalfa hopper. So if you're out scouting your fields looking for worms, looking for stink bugs, and you notice that your plants are snapping off on the base and that you're losing more plants than you'd like to, or maybe your stand that once looked good now looks bad, there's a chance that you have this animal in your field. And what's going on is our beans are coming up, and for various climatic reasons, either being too cold and wet, too hot and dry, they're not growing. And so when they stay in this 2 to 3 inch height, they're the perfect susceptibility for this insect to come in, feed around the stem, and how it feeds is it injects a chemical and then sucks everything back in, and it creates these warts. It creates what ultimately becomes a girdle in the stem that not only dams nutrients but creates a leak spot. When plants get older, it's feeding on petioles and peduncles, and that's non-economic. So if you go out there and you find you've lost a lot of plants and you see these little insects hopping everywhere, if you spray them now, you're getting revenge, but you're not helping anything. This is what the adults look like. They're very fast. So you see a lot of green things going ping, 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 ping. You open your sweep net and a bunch hit you in the face. This is what they look like when they're still. And this is what their nymphs look like. They're very small. They blend in with the stem. They squirrel you and walk around. I'd say if you've noticed you have this problem, we've done a lot of research this year on spraying insecticides and using different seed treatments. And though I don't have the final data, by looking at it, it doesn't look like our insecticides are doing a whole lot. And that's just because of the limitations in the system. The plants don't grow. The insecticides have a short protection window and they run out. And reapplications are not as effective as I want them to be. So I don't want you to try to battle this thing with insecticides next year. I think our best defense is a good offense. Have a healthy stand, plant more seeds. Those are the two things that have shown promise so far. So now let's talk about what you're seeing this year. And what you should be looking for. Oh, hey, Doug. Letting Doug in. I'm not sure if this top button thing is you can see it. I apologize if you can. The thing about when we're going into August with soybeans is our caterpillar pests, and the 3 big ones that you're going to see in Virginia are the green clover worm, this insect here on the top left. It is very bright green. It thrashes around in your hand when you pick it up. It's a defoliator. It's typically a very minor pest. We don't spend a lot of energy scouting for it. There's no threshold for it because the thresholds based on these 2 top insects are defoliation. I'll talk about that shortly. The soybean leaper is also bright green, but it moves like an inchworm. It does not thrash around. It consumes a lot more leaf tissue than a green clover worm, and it can be a lot more problematic to kill. Before we talk about defoliation, though, corn earworm for a long time was our #1 pest in soybeans. It probably still is in eastern parts of the state. And that's because it's a pod feeder. It's going after the reproductive tissue on the plants. So it's eating flowers and small pods. And corn earworm thresholds really depend on the price of beans. So the more expensive your bushel price is, the lower your threshold for worm feeding is. The more expensive your insecticide is, the higher the threshold. So this is all very variable, and I'm happy to walk anyone and everyone through how I make spray decisions for corn earworm, but very generally 2 to 4 caterpillars per 15 sweeps is our threshold. High risk fields have open canopies, so that moth as she's flying through the air, what she's looking for is the difference in contrast between the ground and the plant, and that's how she finds her way in. And that also lets her lay her eggs near the pods and the flowers, because insect mothers are good mothers by putting their eggs where the best food is. So if your plants are past flowering and small pod, you're probably not even going to get them because there's nothing to bring them in. If you've got a closed canopy, it's really hard for that moth to hone in on your plants. It's harder for her to get in there and lay her eggs. So those are your high risk scenarios. When we look at defoliation thresholds, I put this little flat or graphic up to help you estimate. You want to estimate defoliation through the entire canopy, so don't just look at the top. A lot of times soybean loopers will start feeding from the bottom of the plant, so pull the plant out of the ground, make sure that you're estimating your leaf area for the entire plant. And you don't want to see more than 15% defoliation until pod fill. Now, if we're talking about pre-reproductive soybeans, you can lose a lot of leaf tissue. And you can lose a lot of leaf tissue pre-reproductive beans or vegetative beans, and you can lose a lot of leaf tissue after pod fill, and it's not cumulative. You can lose 30%, 30%, 10% during pod, and you're fine. So these are very conservative thresholds. I feel like you can lose more leaf tissue than this and be okay, but it's 15% leaf tissue until pod fill. And then after pod fill, 50, 60%, even more. It's really hard to cause a yield loss by losing your leaves. So I want to encourage you to be conservative, but there are certainly worst case scenarios where soybean leapers can reach us earlier because they're a migratory insect and mess you up while you still need those plants to be creating carbohydrates through photosynthesis. Stink bugs are the other pests we start scouting this time of year through really R5, much past R6, double the thresholds on these. This is our green stink bug, and it's nymphs and eggs. This is a new stink bug to Virginia. It's the southern green stink bug. The adult looks identical to the green stink bug unless you're going to take it in the lab and put it under magnification and flip it over on its back. But the nymphs look a little bit funkier with this pink around their margin, little black nymphs. You may see them in the field and be like, I don't recognize this. That's because we haven't had them very long. Again, they're a southern species and we're not getting cold enough to kill them in the winter anymore. And treat them like any other stink bug. They're just as easy to kill as a green. So, you know, no big deal. Where I see a difference in these and the greens is I tend to find more southern greens in the field. So when I do find them, I find, oh, Ursula's here. These are on the eastern shore. Hey, Ursula. I tend to find a lot of southern greens. Like if I find them, I'm finding a bucket full. I'm not just finding one or two here or there, but treat them like any stink bug and use any insecticide that you would use for stink bugs. Our thresholds for stink bugs depend on whether you're growing for grain or seed, and you can calculate it number per row foot. So 1 to 2 for most of our grain varieties, or you can calculate them per number of sweeps, and it's 5 stink bugs per 15 sweeps of any species in our grain soybeans. So this up here is a brown stink bug adult and nymph, green stink bug adult and nymph, more brown marmorated now in the system. I think we're used to seeing those. My predecessor Ames had a very good program of informing people what those are. You count a nymph as one as soon as it's dispersed from the little grouping. So once they hatch, they'll all stay on that egg mass and eat that egg mass, get those nutrients, those proteins that start on the system. Count that egg mass and all those little hatching insects as one. As soon as they're out on the plant by themselves, count them as one. So what happens when you have all these things at once? What should I spray if I have a net like you see here on the left? This is really common. We've got a corn earworm, a couple different stages. We've got a green stink bug, brown stink bugs. We have a green clover worm. There's probably a looper in this mix. And this slide is really hard to see, so I'm going to unpack it kind of for you. Again, I left alfalfa hopper off of here. They're easy to kill, but at this stage in soybean, you don't need to try to kill them. So for stink bugs, you can either use acephate or you can use pyrethroids. Acephate is a better stink bug product, especially against browns. But if we hit a dry period, you can run a pretty high risk of getting spider mites, and spider mites aren't a cheap pest to fix. Now, if it stays wet and we're getting plenty of rain, that's your best defense against spider mites. Pyrethroids, use the max labeled rate. I use the max labeled rate whenever I use a pyrethroid, and that's because even at the lowest label rate, it's going to kill beneficials and pollinators. And so you're not saving anything in your system by using a low rate. You're going to kill the things that you don't want to kill at the low rate. So use the max labeled rate because you need it against brown stink bugs, and you'll probably need it against corn earworm if that's what you're targeting. I would not expect them to have 100% efficacy against corn earworm, but they should kill some. Do not spray a pyrethroid on a soybean leaper. They're completely resistant and they will go through the roof if you kill their natural enemies. They're really slow caterpillars, and think parasitoids, parasitic wasps, a lot of things like to eat soybean loopers, and you'll kill them with a pyrethroid. And then you'll have, you know, a net full of loopers. I'm not even exaggerating this problem. The other tricky part about soybean loopers is they are sometimes diamide resistant. So they're flying through a lot of insecticides in a lot of states before they get to us. So Prevathon and Besiege won't 100% clean them up. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of efficacy. So when you're spraying for worms, corn earworm, Prevathon, and Besiege are great products. Intrepid Edge, Stewart, Radiant, and Blackhawk are all great worm products as well. They will also kill soybean loopers. What happens when you get into these worm products, so everything from Prevathon down here to Blackhawk, is you won't get stink bug efficacy. So if you're trying to kill worms and you're trying to kill stink bugs, you're going to need to mix in a pyrethroid or acephate with one of these products. Now, Besiege is already a combo product. It's got a chemical similar to Prevathon, and it's got also in it Warrior 2 or Karate, which is a pyrethroid, so it does okay. You will have to scout after a Besiege application for soybean loopers, because you may or may not have gotten them with the worm material in there, and you could be making them worse with the pyrethroid in there. There are now mixes of Prevathon with bifenthrin. Different companies call them by different names. If I listed every single name on this slide, it wouldn't help you. Just work with your chemical dealer and know that these premium worm products that work really well for all of your caterpillars will need some help for the stink bugs. So now that we're getting into spending more money and adding multiple products, I think the best thing you can do and David starts talking about those R3 or 4 fungicide sprays, hold off on putting a pyrethroid in there automatically, because soybean loopers are a real risk to us now. If you have any questions, I encourage you to call my mobile phone this time of year. You can send me an email, but I'm likely to get behind because I'm outside and section talking about BT corn. But I can answer any of your questions you have about soybean, and I'll bring some sampling tools too if you need some insect identification help, or you want to learn how to use a sleep net or a bead cloth. I encourage you to come to my table. Myself and the other extension specialist use the Virginia Ag Pest and Crop Advisory to give you real-time updates in the season. I encourage you to sign up for this blog if you haven't done so. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I'll turn the floor over to David.
Sally, so when we're calculating, we obviously in this area in the eastern part, I'm in Tappahannock, and I'm looking at corn earworms. So should I take into account loopers and what have you when I'm tallying up whether that should be an effective spray or not?
You know,
as far as foliage, so.
Out of anywhere in the state, you are the safest from loopers. And I don't know why that is. I know where your farm is. We planted some corn together last year. And I plant soybeans there at Warsaw, and I've planted some at Foxhall, not too far from you. And I've never seen a looper there. But I don't want to put that broad statement out to the rest of the state. But for some reason, that little pocket in there, I don't see them.
Well, or I'm sorry, you're right. We call them loopers, but probably green. They're clover worms. So should I factor in the clover worms as far as defoliation when I'm looking at my numbers?
I don't count clover worms. I just look at defoliation. So when I see I'm getting over that 15% in my reproductive stages, then I get out my sweet net and my beet cloth, and I ask myself what's eating my beans. Because you can have bean leaf beetle, you can have Japanese beetle, you can have clover worm, you can have soybean leaper. A lot of things could be eating that leaf foliage. and I want to make sure I'm spraying the right thing. Green clover worm is extremely easy to kill. You'll kill it with a pyrethroid, you'll kill it with a worm product. The only place I have ever had to spray for green clover worm is unfortunately Warsaw. So you don't get looper, but you do get green clover worm. The nice part about clover worm is they're easier to kill.
Okay, and I had to step out. I may have missed it, but grasshoppers. Should we be looking at those as far as defoliation?
I would have said once I've never sprayed grasshoppers for defoliation, but then last year that made me a liar. Get away from the edge of the field when you're making those defoliation decisions, just because that's where grasshoppers tend to congregate. You can get grasshoppers with pyrethroids. Acephate usually kills them better. There's some suppression with Previthon, and there's some efficacy of Dimlin, which can make, in and of itself, Dimlin can improve soybean appearance and sometimes yield, but I don't know the price of that product. I would say if generally for you, a pyrethroid would work at the max labeled rate, but you may not get the bigger adults, but you'll get the nymphs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I see nothing in the chat. I'll hang out a little bit. I'll turn my camera and video off. So if you have any more insight questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll leave it now to David.
Thanks, Sally. Appreciate you being here this morning. All right, David, we can see your slides, so you should be good to go.
Sorry about that. I lost my main screen, so I had to figure out how to unmute. Hey everybody, I'm David Langston, the row crop plant pathologist at Virginia Tech, located at the Tidewater AREC in Suffolk. I'm going to talk about some things to look for this time of year with soybean diseases and nematodes. You know, we're in the phase now where I think a lot of people, if they've sprayed a fungicide, they've already used it. We recommend spraying. Let me get into the slides before I start talking about that. We typically spray between R3 and R5. That's a spray window that we recommend spraying fungicides for foliar diseases with soybeans. And if you know, a lot of studies have shown if you spray late after R5, you don't really get a benefit of those fungicides on soybeans for foliar diseases. Some of that is a little bit, you know, it's almost not intuitive, because if you don't see disease after R5, you think a fungicide should be able to help, but during the pod formation stage and when they're starting pod fill, you know, those fungicides aren't going to impact yield enough to pay for themselves typically. There's some environmental conditions that we also use to time sprays. So it's kind of tricky, because what we normally tell people is if you've got extended periods of high humidity and leaf wetness during that R3 to R5 stage, that's when we feel like you're going to get more bang for your buck on your fungicides, primarily for frog eye leaf spot and Cercospora blight. And if you notice here, most of the pathogens have a very similar temperature range, which we don't have any problem here in Virginia this time of year with getting those temperatures. It's mostly driven by weather conditions. So if you're in a dry area, spraying a fungicide in R3 and R5 probably won't pay for itself. But if you're in an area that's getting high humidity and frequent rains, if you're planning on spraying, you're going to do the best you can with fungicide during that time. So I hear a lot of people talk about sudden death syndrome, and in Virginia, my experience has been with sudden death syndrome is we do see some, but not everything you see is sudden death syndrome. Sudden death is caused by a soil-borne fungus Fusarium. So this thing is in the soil before you plant your soybeans. So if you've had problems in fields that you've had confirmed sudden death in, and you continue to plant soybeans there, you should in certain years see the fungus. A lot of the damage and early infection occurs fairly early. Most fusarium diseases that attack the roots are cool weather pathogens, so they do more damage to young. They infect when soybean plants are small, but you don't really see the damage until soybean plants are much larger when they're starting with pod fill. This is what we see with a lot of these similar fusarium diseases. They don't necessarily kill the plant upon infection, but their infection is evident once the plants have a heavy fruit load or pod load, and the requirements for nutrients and water are higher. So that's why you see it later, is because the vascular system's been compromised early on, and you're seeing the effect of that compromise later in the season. What we typically talk about with disease control with SDS or resistant varieties. And there are several varieties out there that claim or have resistance to sudden death some level. Seed treatments can help reduce sudden death syndrome, especially your group 7 fungicide seed treatments like Alevo or Saltro. Those are both group 7 fungicides that are active against the fusarium fungus, and also reducing soybean cyst population. So what soybean cyst does is the feeding from soybean cyst nematode creates avenues of infection for fusarium. So a lot of times when you see real bad SDS in a field and you pull those plants up, you also have a good many soybean cyst females on the outside of those roots. So they often go hand in hand and if you look at the pictures at the bottom, we see soil borer diseases with a patchy distribution. It's not random. It's not what I would consider scattered. If you see groups of plants that are showing symptoms, that's typical of a soil-borne disease. The early symptoms are typically just flecks of chlorosis on the leaves. And then what we normally see and what people report or bring into the clinic are plants showing the intervenal chlorosis and necrosis. That's what's most associated with SDS. But really, the best way to diagnose it in the field, if it's in the morning, if there's adequate moisture, you'll see the bluish fungal growth right around the soil line or just below the soil line. If you pull a plant up, it's a very distinct fungal growth there. Sometimes some people are thrown off by seed coat colors, because some of your seed coats on your seeds might be either bluish or greenish. And I know sometimes we'll actually see that on some, and it's not SDS. The best way to confirm it is to send a sample to the clinic. Coupled with that is vascular discoloration, far right. And I don't know if you can see that picture well enough, but it's not a super distinct vascular discoloration that we see in plants that are still green that are showing intervenal symptoms. It's more of just a darker one. And probably the best way to characterize it or way to look at it in the field is pull up a healthy plant that's not showing symptoms and pull up an affected plant and split both of the root systems and compare them, because that way you look at what a healthy plant vascular system should look like, and you look at what a diseased sample looks like, and you have a way to compare it. A lot of things are misdiagnosed as SDS, and we see a good bit of this coming to the clinic too. And there's a lot of things that can cause intervenal chlorosis and necrosis in soybean plants. Brown stem rot is one. So we've got the Cadophora fungus that attacks the plant. And basically what it is anything that can cause a disruption in the flow of nutrients and water up into the foliage can cause intervenal chlorosis and necrosis. So brown stem rot is one of them. And the way we really key on that one is to split that stem and the pith. that's in the center of that will be brown, and you'll see what we call chambering, or which is the pith will be broken up into several different little sections, and it'll be brown. So that's one way we diagnose it as brown stem rot. So that's one of the players that can be misdiagnosed as SDS. Some of your foliar fungicides will actually cause intervenal chlorosis, necrosis. I know that the fluopyram product that's used in some of the fungicides that we use can cause this. But the thing about fungicide injury, if you're seeing this, it won't be distributed like you see with SDS, because it should be more evenly distributed. It's not groups of plants that are affected, because that fungicide was applied to the whole crop, so it's not going to be distributed like SDS. So if you see symptoms like this and they're not in patches, but they're more evenly distributed across the field, and if you go and pull up some of these, and you should not see vascular discoloration in the root and stem tissue with fungicide injury. Root knot nematode, or just nematode feeding in general, could cause vascular discoloration, and once again, it's just disruption of the vascular tissue that causes that. Of course, this looks a little bit different in the slide that I showed. It looks more like intervenal spotting, but in some cases, you'll actually see intervenal necrosis, just like you're seeing here with brown stem rot. Once again, pull up the plant and look at the roots. And I do believe, even though it's not well documented, that southern root knot nematode can also lead to more SDS. Anything that damages that root system early can lead to more SDS. So I wouldn't be surprised if you were to pull up some soybean plants that were showing SDS symptoms, and you see galling from root knot nematode. Stem canker, which is caused by the diporthe/phomopsis fungus. Once again, you'll see these cankers down below, and where those cankers occur, it's disrupting the vascular system, and you'll get the symptoms. But what I want you to look for with diporthe phomopsis is look for those cankers, and you'll see these dark, almost these black streaks which are the fungal fruiting bodies in those lesions. And we saw a good bit of this. Matter of fact, most of what we got last year in the clinic was phomopsis and not SDS, because I kept plating all this stuff out on agar, and it was all showing up phomopsis. And so that's mostly what we were getting. So that's the thing you need to key on. Not a lot of fungicides are going to control canker. It's mostly resistant varieties, but you might pick up a little bit of control with the group 7 fungicide. But I don't know it's anything that you'll be able to see a significant difference in yield with. But once again, diporthe phomopsis is what we saw last year, and I've talked to the pathologist in Delaware, and she says she sees the same thing. Is that when people are turning in a lot of these samples, it's not SDS, it's phomopsis, and it might give us the feeling what we've got is a bigger phomopsis problem, but maybe not as big an SDS problem. And red crown rot, I don't see this a whole lot, but it's a fungus that attacks the base of the plant, disrupting the vascular system and leading to intervenal symptoms. And when you look at the base of that plant at the soil line, you should see these brick red fruiting structures of the fungus. That's very diagnostic of red crown rot, which when we used to grow, when we had peanut varieties that were very that weren't resistant to red crown rot, this is what caused our CBR, or crown rot in peanuts years ago. It's the same fungus. It's attacking lignin, so it's an opportunistic pathogen. I haven't seen a lot of red crown rot here. It's really easy to plate out. So if we get a sample in and we biopsy it on agar, if it's red crown rot, we'll see it because it's easy to grow. So, and we didn't see any last year. I don't think this is as big a problem here as it is maybe in other states with soybeans. Just a word on soybean rust, since we're talking about fungi. This is the latest map that I pulled off the internet today of soybean rust as it's moving through from south to north. And if you notice, the nearest positive sample to us is in Burke County, Georgia, which is the red county that's right on the South Carolina line. A lot of times, you know, southern states are going to see more problems with soybean rust, maybe more yield losses, because the disease has more time to do damage. By the time soybean rust gets here, we typically don't, at least I don't feel like it's going to cause any significant problems. It doesn't overwinter here. It has to travel this way. So if you want to track soybean rust, if you got late planted soybeans that might be harvested late, or groups that might be group soybeans that might be harvested late, keep track of this. And if you know basically what I did was I just typed in soybean rust map in Google, and this is one of the top things you'll get is this. It's IPM pipe. Look for that as well. When you look at the link to it, it'll say IPM pipe, PIPE, and it'll give you the latest the latest movement of soybean rust as it moves throughout the U.S. But this is the map I pulled off this morning, and I also got an email from the pathologist at University of Georgia that confirmed that it was in Burke County. So this is something to keep an eye on. You know, if we get a hurricane or get storms that move through the area soon, it could bring those excuse me, those rust spores up to our area earlier than expected, and if so, hopefully we'll be able to react to it with fungicide treatment on beans that are not too far along. Lastly, I'm going to need some help with soybean nematode work and SDS work. So any of you, if you have fields that look like they've got SDS and we confirm that it's SDS, we want to know about them because I want to be able to confirm it and identify it and look at the distribution of the disease in Virginia. And in combination with that, if we're seeing soybean cyst in those fields, or if you have a field that just has soybean cyst and not SDS, we want to know about it too. So we're really looking for both or one or the other. So it's like if you find root soybean cyst, SDS, or root knot, we want to be able to culture those nematodes and determine what species it is and to some degree what race it is. We're going to do a lot of HG typing on SCN to determine if we've got any races that are other than race 3, which means that our predominant soybean varieties that we grow in Virginia will be susceptible to races that are not race 3. So we want to be able to track that. And this is part of something I'm doing with some of the strip trials and some of the counties where I have strip trials in, where we're planting soybeans that have Peking resistance, which is a broad resistance to soybean cyst nematode, and seeing if we're able to get better disease nematode control with those Peking varieties. The problem with Peking varieties is they're not readily available. And most of them are not. You'd be hard pressed to find a group 4 that has SCN resistance. The ones that I'm working with are all group 5s. So that creates a problem as well. But I think some of the companies are trying to develop more group 4s with the Peking type resistance. Another thing I want to do with these is I want to get information on the cultural practices, the varieties and the seed treatment, so that we can, wherever these problems pop up, I want to do some get as much background information to understand what leads to these problems so that we can come up with better recommendations. Because if we're identifying a lot of the same cultural practices and varieties and seed treatments that are not effective in controlling the SDS and soybean cyst, we'll be able to correct that with the correct treatments or varieties. I've already talked about what we're doing with SDS and the race typing for soybean cyst. and I'm hoping in long term to be able to cut down on how much of these problems that we see. Especially we see more soybean cyst obviously than we do, at least in my opinion, than we do SDS. A lot of the things that we see that we think are SDS are actually caused by other pathogens. So I encourage you, anytime you see anything that looks like SDS, I'd love to get those samples into the clinic, confirm what it is, and then if it is, then we'll do some follow-up work to get as much information on what's been done to the field, what the rotation history is, and varieties and seed treatments on that to be able to try to prevent it in the future. And I'm thinking that's the magic slide that everybody's been looking for. That means I'm done. I'll be happy to answer any questions regarding anything I presented at this time. Thank you.
All right, thanks, David. Any questions for Dr. Langston on diseases or nematodes at this time? I don't see anything in the chat window.
Yeah, if I said anything that you want to ask a question about, or if I didn't say something that you wanted to hear about, please let me know. If you don't ask now, you can shoot me an email. You can get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to talk to you.
David, I know I have root knot. I can work through Robbie if you want to look at some of these fields, or if Robbie wants to do it, pull some samples.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And our main thing is just identifying the species, and we can think about how we can manage that. There are several varieties that have root knot resistance. There's more varieties that have root knot resistance, especially in group 4. And so that'd be a good thing to look at, not just, identifying those this year, but maybe looking at putting some root knot resistant varieties in there for upcoming seasons, and maybe some strip trial work.
I found a group 4. It's an early 4. It has a 9 out of 10 on root knot. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm putting 2 years of soybeans with that bean in, trying to reduce populations as best I can. But the other issue we have is putting in cover crops that potentially can host some of these, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to research that.
Well, I'm talking to a consultant and talking to people about setting up a program for using the appropriate cover crops to be able to reduce. It's not as big a deal with cyst as it is with root knot. Cyst is so specific in what it attacks. Root knot can parasitize a lot of different plants, include some of our legume cover crops. So we got to be careful not to plant something that actually, some of them aren't great at reducing populations. Some of them are real good at reducing populations, and some legume cover crops actually increase populations. So it'll be good to, I'm trying to put that information together to start fine tuning our cover crop options for upcoming years.
All right, any other questions this morning? Well, David, we appreciate you being with us and answering the questions, giving the information. David's presentation will be in the recording that we put up along with Sally's. So thank you both again for being with us this morning and sharing these updates. If you see issues in your soybean fields, call your local extension agent, and we'd be happy to work with Sally and David to get those samples submitted, or help troubleshoot some of those fields and help, try to set you up maybe for more success next year to try to combat some of those issues. So please reach out to us if you have questions or concerns. On the screen, you'll see we just want to kind of help promote next week, Thursday, August the 5th, 2021 is going to be the 2021 Virginia Ag Expo. Down in Middlesex County at Corbin Hall Farm. So just want to encourage everybody, if you're interested and available, come on out for the Virginia Ag Expo next Thursday. The gates will open at 7:30 a.m. It's usually a really great event, a lot of good field trials put in. I know both Sally and Dr. Langston, I think, may have some trials down at the site. So just want to encourage folks to visit that next week. We will have our next session of VCE AG Today 2 weeks from today. So we're doing this program every other Thursday now at 9 a.m. So stay tuned for that with updates on upcoming topics. And you can see the information there to join us, as well as the recording link. And then, of course, last but not least, just like to take a moment and thank all the agents, as well as our interns this summer for all of their hard work and dedication to the program and making it possible for everyone each week that we offer the program. So thank you to all of those folks. Again, one last time, just like to thank Dr. Langston and Dr. Taylor for being with us this morning and all their great information. So hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Hopefully we can get some rain here in at least the Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck region over the next day or two. But I know some parts of the state, Dr. Langston was saying we're a little on the wet side and the south side. So wherever you are, hopefully you get what you need. So hope everyone stays well, and we'll see everyone next time. Thanks.